When an avoidant first loses access to you, the first thing they feel is not panic, regret, or longing, it's relief. And this confuses people because it feels like proof that the avoidant never cared. But that relief is not about you. It's about their nervous system finally getting distance from emotional intensity. Avoidants are wired to disconnect from anything that feels overwhelming, even if it's good for them. So when you go silent, or when the connection fades, their body reacts before their heart does. The pressure drops. The emotional noise quiets. They suddenly feel like they can breathe again. But what they don't realize is that this relief is temporary. It is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of a psychological cycle they can't escape. Avoidants confuse safety with distance. They learned early in life that emotions meant danger, unpredictability, chaos, expectations, demands. So distance became their safety zone, the only place they felt in control. When you stop reaching out, when you stop checking in, when your presence disappears, their system relaxes because it believes it has returned to safety. It's not that they're celebrating losing you. They're celebrating escaping the emotional intensity that triggers their wounds. But this temporary calm is deceptive because it only lasts as long as their old defenses hold up, and those defenses always crack once silence stays consistent. Because after the initial relief fades, something unexpected begins to happen inside them. Life gets quiet, too quiet. The absence of your energy creates a space they didn't anticipate. At first, they fill that space with distractions, routines, work, hobbies, anything that keeps them from feeling. But avoidants don't realize how much your presence stabilizes them until your absence destabilizes them. And that shift creeps in slowly, not as a dramatic ache, but as an emptiness they can't explain. A missing piece they didn't know they would long for. A mental echo of your presence. Their initial relief becomes their undoing, because the silence they once needed now begins to reveal a truth they're not ready to face. The emotional connection didn't disappear just because the communication did. Their feelings didn't vanish, only their access to you did. And avoidants hate losing access more than they hate intimacy. It's the quiet moments, brushing their teeth, eating breakfast, lying in bed at night where they feel the shift the most. The habits they built around avoiding closeness no longer protect them from the growing awareness that something valuable is missing. What's happening is psychological. Relief belongs to the mind, missing belongs to the heart, and avoidants always process the mind first, the heart second. Once the mind settles, the heart wakes up. And that waking is painful because it forces them to confront what they tried to run from. They cared more than they admitted, and they thought your presence was permanent. Their relief was just the calm before the emotional storm. As days pass, the silence you left behind becomes heavier. Their thoughts drift back to you. They notice patterns, checking their phone, replaying old conversations, wondering about your life. They recognize that the peace they felt was not peace, it was avoidance. And avoidance doesn't soothe forever, it delays pain. This is when the avoidant enters the stage they fear most: reflection. Reflection leads to awareness. Awareness leads to emotion, and emotion leads to regret. And once they reach regret, they can no longer pretend your absence is something they're okay with. The relief they felt initially becomes the clue that exposes their fear, their avoidance, and ultimately, their attachment to you. Their story always begins with relief, but it never ends there. When your silence becomes peaceful instead of emotional, something happens inside the avoidant that they never expect. They see themselves clearly for the first time. Avoidants spend most of their lives running from emotional mirrors. They avoid conversations that reveal their flaws. They avoid closeness that exposes their wounds. They avoid partners who make them confront the parts of themselves they've buried. But when you fall silent in a calm, grounded, non-reactive way, you become a mirror they cannot escape. Your silence reflects back everything they tried to hide, deny, or rationalize. At first, they don't understand what they're feeling. Avoidants rely heavily on external cues to maintain their narratives. As long as you chased them, they could blame the emotional pressure. As long as you tried to fix things, they could claim they felt overwhelmed. As long as you asked for communication, they could label you as needy. These stories protected them from accountability. But when you shift into peaceful silence, a silence that doesn't beg, doesn't demand, doesn't accuse, those narratives collapse. There is nothing to push against, nothing to run from, nothing to blame. All that's left is themselves. This is where the real psychological unraveling begins. Avoidants are not afraid of you. They're afraid of the emotional reflection intimacy forces them to see. When you stop trying, stop explaining, stop reaching out, the avoidant is left alone with the truth of their own behavior. They can't distract themselves with excuses because your silence gives them none. They can't pretend you're overly emotional because you're not reacting. They can't pretend you're unstable because you're calm. They can't pretend you're chasing because you're not moving toward them at all. Your peaceful silence dismantles their entire emotional defense system. Slowly, their mind starts replaying moments, the softness in your voice, the way you cared, the stability you offered. They begin to notice how much effort you invested, how many times you showed patience, how often you tried to understand them. Your silence forces them to see the contrast. Your effort versus their avoidance, your openness versus their shutdown, your presence versus their distance. This comparison is uncomfortable, even painful, because for the first time, they can no longer pretend they were the one holding the emotional high ground. They see the places where they hurt you. They see the parts of themselves they avoid. They see the emotional cowardice behind their withdrawal. This reflection cracks their self-image. Avoidants pride themselves on being logical, grounded, emotionally controlled. Your silence reveals the opposite, that their avoidance was not strength but fear. And this realization shakes them. It makes them rethink the way they treated you. It makes them question their choices. It makes them confront the truth that they pushed away someone who didn't harm them, didn't suffocate them, didn't betray them, but simply loved them in a way they didn't know how to receive. Your silence also shows them something else. You are not dependent on them. You don't need them. You're not waiting for them. That realization hits deeper than anything else. Because as long as you were talking, reaching, trying, they could tell themselves they were safe. They believed you would always be there, no matter how distant, inconsistent, or confusing they became. But your calm silence breaks that illusion. Suddenly, they understand that your presence wasn't inevitable, it was a gift, and they mishandled it. This is when their emotional mirror becomes sharp. They feel the contrast between who they thought they were and who the silence reveals them to be. They feel the gap between who you were for them and who they were for you. They feel the loss of someone who showed them a version of love they didn't appreciate. And slowly, the silence that once comforted them becomes the silence that haunts them. Your peaceful detachment becomes the reflection they cannot escape. It forces them to face their patterns, their fears, their mistakes, and the deeper truth they avoided. They didn't lose you because you were too much. They lost you because they gave too little. And seeing that, seeing themselves clearly, is the beginning of their awakening and the first step toward wanting you back. When an avoidant is falling for you, the thing that catches them off guard isn't your presence, it's your absence. Not immediately, not dramatically, and not in a way that they can articulate. Avoidants are slow processors. Their feelings move like deep water, quiet, hidden, and delayed. So when you step back, when your voice isn't in their ear, when your warmth is no longer wrapping around their world, they don't feel the collapse right away. Their system is trained to feel safer without emotional intensity, so at first, they only notice the relief of space. But as that space stretches, something unexpected begins to happen. The silence starts to echo, and within that echo, your absence transforms from something comfortable into something unbearable. Avoidants don't immediately realize what they've lost because they aren't sensitive to emotional presence in the moment. They're sensitive to emotional times, contrast, asterisk. They only feel the value of something once it is gone. Their nervous system is wired to detect threat first, gratitude last. So, as the days pass, the emotional baseline they were used to, your check-ins, your empathy, your steadiness begins to fade from their daily rhythm. And only when that rhythm breaks do they realize how much emotional regulation they were unconsciously borrowing from you. Your absence becomes the one thing they can't push away, because it enters through the side door of their mind. It shows up in the smallest, quietest moments, reaching for their phone without knowing why, pausing over something they want to share, hearing something that reminds them of your laugh, noticing a thought that ends with your name. These tiny interruptions begin to accumulate, and slowly, The absence they didn't respect becomes the presence they can't escape. Avoidants aren't used to missing people, they're used to avoiding emotions. But missing you doesn't hit them like a wave. It hits like a drip. A steady, subtle, persistent drip that cracks through their defenses drop by drop. At first it's confusion. Why am I thinking about them? Then it becomes curiosity. What are they doing? Are they okay? Then it becomes discomfort. Why does it bother me that they haven't reached out? And eventually it becomes the emotion they fear most, longing. Your absence creates longing because it activates a psychological space inside them that has never been filled. Avoidants grew up expecting inconsistency, instability, or emotional distance. When they met you, they experienced something different: steadiness, care, presence, softness. And now, their nervous system is noticing the loss of what it never knew it needed. The absence reveals the value in a way your presence never could. This is the moment they begin connecting the dots. They start remembering the comfort you provided, the emotional safety you quietly held for them, the way you grounded the connection. They begin noticing how their daily routine feels flatter, colder, emptier without you. Emotionally stable people move on by focusing outward. Avoidants move on by being confronted inward. And your absence forces that confrontation. Your absence becomes the silent teacher that exposes everything they denied about their own feelings. It shows them that they weren't just attached to the routine, they were attached to times you asterisk. It shows them that they didn't just enjoy the connection, they relied on it more than they ever admitted. It shows them that their relief was temporary, but their loss is real. And as the silence grows louder, their mind starts spiraling deeper. What if you don't come back? What if someone else replaced them? What if you finally found peace without them? What if they pushed away the only person who actually understood them? Avoidants don't fear intimacy, they fear needing someone. And now they realize they need you in a way they cannot justify, cannot rationalize, cannot ignore. That is the moment your absence transforms into the one thing their avoidance cannot silence: the truth, that they lost something rare, safe, irreplaceable. And the truth begins to hurt more than closeness ever did. The moment an avoidant realizes you're not coming back doesn't happen when you leave. It doesn't happen when you fall silent. It doesn't even happen when they notice your absence. It happens when their mind finally accepts the one truth they spent their whole life avoiding. Your world is still moving, and it's moving without them. That moment is their psychological breaking point, the point where fear of intimacy becomes smaller than the fear of losing you forever. And the shift happens quietly, internally, and with a force that shakes them more than any confrontation ever could. Avoidants have always relied on a subconscious belief that you will be there, that no matter how distant, inconsistent, or avoidant they become, you will try again, you will reach out, you will explain, you will wait. That belief is their safety net, the emotional cushion they use to justify their distance. As long as they feel your presence chasing their absence, they feel in control. They believe they can return whenever they want because the connection feels endlessly available. But when that sense of availability disappears, when your silence stays steady, when your energy remains calm, when your life begins expanding, without them, something inside them collapses. They realize the one thing they trusted as permanent was, in reality, temporary. They realize you were a choice every single day, not a guarantee. And for the first time, they confront a fear they've never processed, the fear of being replaced. They begin replaying everything, not to justify themselves, but to understand how they missed the warning signs. They remember the last time you spoke, the softness in your tone, the patience in your presence. They notice how you didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't cling. They notice that your silence wasn't cold, it was resolved. And that resolution is what breaks them, because now they recognize that you weren't waiting for them to change. You were preparing to walk away without needing closure from them. Avoidants expect partners to demand explanations. They expect emotional chaos. They expect someone to fight for the connection just one more time. But when instead they're met with a silence that doesn't ask for understanding, they lose their emotional script. They no longer know what role to play. They can't rely on guilt, reassurance, or comfort. They can't assume you're in emotional pain they can ignore. Your calm becomes the evidence they feared. You're healing in a direction that doesn't include them. That's when anxiety, real, deep anxiety begins to set in. Not anxiety about intimacy, anxiety about regret. They start imagining scenarios that terrify them. You connecting with someone emotionally available, someone who treats you the way they never learned to. They imagine you becoming happier without them. They imagine you reaching a level of peace they never helped you find. And the idea of you finding someone who gives what they withheld, that becomes unbearable. Avoidants are used to emotional distance because distance allowed them to feel in control. But now the distance feels different. It feels final. It feels like a goodbye they never prepared for. And the worst part for them is that they realize it didn't happen suddenly. It happened silently, gradually, gracefully. You didn't slam the door, you simply stopped holding it open. This is the psychological breaking point. The moment they no longer fear being close, they fear being forgotten. They no longer worry about losing their independence, they worry about losing you. Their brain shifts from avoiding attachment to fearing abandonment. And this shift destabilizes them more than intimacy ever did. Now they begin to understand something their avoidance kept them blind to. You were never asking for too much. They were giving too little. You were not overwhelming. You were patient. You were not clingy. You were consistent. You were not demanding. You were hopeful. They begin to feel the grief not of losing a relationship, but of losing a person who offered them something rare, a safe, emotional home they didn't know how to receive. The realization that you're not coming back, not because you're angry, but because you're finally at peace, is the exact point their avoidance fractures. And in that fracture, the avoidant finally feels what they feared most, the full weight of losing the one connection they truly wanted, but didn't know how to protect. When your silence becomes closure, real, calm, unbothered closure, the avoidant doesn't just lose access to you, they lose access to every psychological defense that once kept them safe. And this is where the emotional impact hits them on 3 levels: their ego, their heart, and their shadow. All at once, all without warning. Avoidants are built on avoidance, avoidance of responsibility, of vulnerability, of emotional intensity. But your silence is the one thing they cannot outrun, because it exposes everything they've hidden from themselves. It hits their ego first. The avoidant ego depends on the idea that times you will always return *. They rely on the belief that you want them more than they want you. They survive emotionally by assuming they hold the power, that they can pull back whenever they want and you'll compensate with more effort. But when you fall silent in a peaceful, non-reactive way, their ego experiences something it has never felt before: instability. Suddenly, they don't know where they stand with you. They don't know if you miss them. They don't know if you still care. They don't know if you're waiting or if you're gone. This cracks the illusion of control they've been hiding behind. The ego that once felt confident now feels insecure, and that insecurity becomes a constant, uncomfortable whisper. What if they really moved on? Then it hits their heart. Avoidants always process emotions late, sometimes weeks or months after the moment has passed. At first they were only reacting logically. Space is good, silence helps, I feel calmer. But as time passes, the heart begins to catch up. The initial relief they felt fades into something they did not expect: longing. They start remembering things they never paid attention to before: the softness in your presence, the way you listened without judgment, the comfort they felt around you even though they pretended they didn't. They begin to miss your energy, your warmth, your emotional steadiness. And because their heart is waking up in the middle of your silence, the contrast is brutal. They feel the loss all at once instead of gradually, and that emotional impact becomes overwhelming. The heart they spent years protecting becomes the heart they can no longer quiet. But the most devastating part for them is when it hits their shadow, the unconscious part of themselves Carl Jung described as the side we repress, deny, and fear. Avoidants hide deep emotional wounds in their shadow: fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of being unlovable. As long as you were trying, their shadow stayed hidden. Your presence soothed the parts of them they never healed. But when you step back, when your silence becomes consistent, their shadow rises. Suddenly, the fears they buried resurface. What if I ruined this? What if I drove away the only person who truly understood me? What if I pushed away the one love I'll never get again? These aren't logical questions, they're emotional confessions their shadow forces them to face, and facing them hurts. Your silence does something their childhood wounds never prepared them, for it creates consequences. For avoidants, consequences are scarier than intimacy, because consequences can't be controlled, they can't be rationalized, they can't be avoided. The shadow shows them every version of themselves they tried to hide, the version that pushes love away, the version that avoids responsibility, the version that fears closeness but fears loss even more. This is the moment your silence becomes a psychological earthquake. It shatters the comfortable distance they relied on. It exposes the emotional truth they denied. It forces them to see that avoidance didn't save the connection, it destroyed it. Your silence doesn't punish them, it reveals them. And in that revelation, they finally understand the depth of what they lost. Not a relationship, not a title, a person, a presence. A safe, emotional home they didn't appreciate until the door quietly closed. And it's that realization, the one that touches their ego, their heart, and their shadow all at once, that makes the avoidant feel a level of regret they can no longer silence. When an avoidant finally reaches the point of coming back, reaching out, apologizing, asking for another chance, it is never sudden. It is the final stage of an emotional process they fought against for as long as they could. They don't return because they're lonely. They don't return because they're bored. They don't return because they want attention. They return because something inside them breaks down in a way they can no longer ignore. Their fear collapses under the weight of their longing, and the connection they once ran from becomes the one thing they now feel compelled to save. This shift is powerful precisely because avoidants resist it for so long. Avoidants function on one core belief: distance keeps them safe. It protects their identity. It protects their independence. It protects their emotions from becoming too exposed. But when your silence stays calm, consistent, and genuine, when you stop offering refuge to their avoidance, it creates a reality they never prepared for. They are forced to experience emotional consequences, and avoidants don't handle consequences well. Their entire attachment system was built to avoid them, so when they feel the full weight of losing you, their nervous system switches directions. Instead of avoiding closeness, they begin avoiding loss. This is when the desire to reach out takes shape. At first, it's a quiet internal pull, a thought that lingers longer than usual, a memory they can't shake off, a question about how you're doing. Then it becomes emotional discomfort, a restless need to check your messages, a subtle panic when they think you've moved on, a heaviness in their chest when they realize they're the reason you're gone. Then comes regret, not the shallow kind avoidants usually hide behind, but real regret, the kind that burns because it forces them to confront the truth. They pushed away someone who genuinely cared, and now they feel it: the loss, the emptiness, the awareness of their own mistakes, the truth that silence carved into their heart. This emotional storm becomes unbearable because avoidants are not skilled at sitting with their own feelings. Their entire strategy in love has been avoiding discomfort, numbing it, escaping it. But your silence removed all the places they used to hide. Their usual emotional exit doors: denial, distraction, distance, no longer work. This creates pressure inside them that eventually breaks through their fear. Their longing becomes louder than their avoidance. The desire to reconnect overrides the instinct to run. The thought of losing you forever becomes more terrifying than the thought of intimacy. This is when they make the move. It might start smaller, high, a casual check-in, a message disguised as friendly curiosity. But underneath the simplicity is panic. They are checking to see if the door is still open. If you respond with warmth but not desperation, their fear softens further. They begin to reveal more. They apologize. They take responsibility, something avoidants rarely do. They admit the truth they once denied. They miss you. They think about you. They feel the loss more deeply than they expected. Avoidants reach out only when the emotional consequences become greater than the emotional risks, when the fear of regret outweighs the fear of closeness, when the longing for the connection becomes stronger than the need for distance, when your silence teaches them that love isn't guaranteed, it has to be earned, protected, and reciprocated. And when they realize this, everything inside them shifts. Their body that once flinched at intimacy now aches for it. Their heart that once hid now wants connection. Their mind that once rationalized leaving now begins imagining returning. They move toward you not because you demanded it, but because your silence rewired their sense of emotional safety. Avoidants don't come back because you chased them. They come back because you stopped chasing. They don't beg because you pressured them. They beg because you released them. They don't apologize because you demanded accountability. They apologize because they finally see themselves clearly. And when that clarity arrives, the avoidant doesn't run anymore, they reach. They reach with the urgency of someone who realized too late that they lost something rare. They reach with the vulnerability they once feared. They reach with the hope of repairing what their avoidance broke, because in the end, it isn't you who brings the avoidant back. It's the silence that revealed the truth they can no longer run from. They don't want freedom from you, they want another chance with you.